Hi, I am Decadent Liwa. For today's video, we will discuss the origins and manifestations of global environmental crisis. So we, human beings, are currently living in a way that is completely unsustainable with the world we live on. A majority of the scientists of our time are unanimous in agreement that climate change is real and is happening more rapidly than normal because of our activities. As of now, humanity has no concrete plan for how to deal with the growing population of human beings on the planet, along with the massive resource depletion, widespread poverty, and pollution. The environmental crisis is really a crisis of consciousness. Most people know that the natural world is facing great challenges and degradation, but few know the true extent of the changes and deprivation of the environment faces and its extended effects on human welfare and all other life on Earth. For the information of everybody, the environmental crisis is a dramatic, unexpected, and irreversible worsening of environment leading to significant welfare losses. Dramatic changes and an element of unexpectedness distinguish crisis from what one would refer to as resource tragedies. On the other hand, if resources or nature are quick healing, then it is difficult to see how any change in the environment should be much concern. But if recovery would take a century or more, things are quite different. There are several warnings that the Earth faces a crisis or is already in crisis have blossomed in late 1960s, some predicting disaster before 2000. By the way, the word crisis is a turning point, a last chance to avoid, mitigate, or adapt. The cause is usually identified as one or a combination of the following: people's cavalier use of nature, overpopulation, misapplication of technology, faulty development ethics. What is perceived to be a crisis is subject to changing beliefs, fashion, and technological ability, and so on. The word crisis has become an overworked word, which affects how people respond to warnings. But the fact that the global human ecosystem is threatened by grave imbalances in productivity and in the distribution of goods and services, as evidenced by the fact that a large proportion of the human population lives in poverty, and that a widening gap exists between those who benefit from economic and technological development and those who do not. And the other fact is that accelerating changes are occurring at the global scale, with rates of economic and social development outstripping progress in achieving internationally coordinated environmental stewardship, with the result that improvements in environmental protection due to the new technologies are being cancelled out by the magnitude and pace of human population growth and economic development. Technically speaking, there would be no effect without a cause. So, here are the general causes of the environmental crisis. First, we have the technological developments over the course of human history, that particularly since the Industrial Revolution, which have allowed humans to exert a greater influence over natural resources and ecosystems. The next one, we have the rapidly increasing human population, which has led to significant increases in human population density in many parts of the world. Next, we have the dramatic increase in resource and energy consumption, and that is particularly since the Industrial Revolution. Next, we have the emergence and development of the capitalist world economy, in which increasing flows of people, resources, products, energy, and waste have occurred, together with increasing environmental impacts. Next, we have utilitarian attitudes towards the environment, which have allowed the unrestricted exploitation of natural resources and ecosystems. And the last one, we have the short-term patterns of decision-making, exhibited by mainly governments, companies, and individuals, which place greater emphasis on short-term profit maximization or value maximization than on environmental protection. Above all, because of the aforementioned human activities, global environmental crisis occurred and could affect our way of living in the future and to future generations.
Environment is the foundation and support of human existence and survival and the guarantee of sustainable human development. Environmental protection has undoubtedly become a common understanding and development strategy of all countries of the world. Now, humankind is striving into the historical process of post-industrial society and trying to reach rebalance with environment and later stage of development. All countries need to perform respective duties and obligations in environment governance, in joint efforts to plan economic development, social progresses, and environment protection to realize mutual wins and sustainable development of the world and to create an earth homeland for harmonious coexistence of humankind and environment. Each and every day, we encounter different problems like pollution and etc. And all of this is because of the wrongdoings of us people living in this world. We abuse some of its natural resources, in which it causes certain problems like the global warming, ozone depletion, and land desertification. So the following are problems we are encountering each and every day. First is the global warming, which refers to the phenomenon of gradual temperature rise of atmosphere, soil, water, and vegetative cover on Earth's surface year by year. Major cause of which is the greenhouse effect due to the emission of such greenhouse gases or GHG as carbon dioxide or also known as CO2, methane, CH4, and nitrous oxide, N2O. On one hand, GHG absorbs the outward long-wave radiation emitted by Earth. It has no any resistance against the inward shortwave radiation from the Sun, and the other, which causes temperature rise in Earth's surface and the lower atmosphere and results in global warming among the GHGs. Carbon dioxide makes over 50% of contribution to global warming. For a long period before the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of carbon dioxide in atmosphere stabilized at 270 to 290 ppm. With accelerated industrialization and urbanization after the 19th century, CO2 concentration started the process of escalation at faster and faster speed. In 2007, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or IPCC released the IPCC Fourth Assessment Report AR4. It is pointed out that the CO2 volume fraction was 379 ppm in the year 2005, which has gone far beyond the scope of spontaneous change in the past 650,000 years. In 2011, the annual greenhouse gas bulletin released by World Meteorological Organization indicates that the greenhouse gas abundance in global atmosphere in 2010 has made a new high industrialized era. Second is the ozone depletion and destruction, which is caused by the ozone depleting substances, mainly chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. Ozone layer can absorb over 99% of the UV ray from solar radiation and thus protect the lives on Earth from UV injury as a natural umbrella of Earth. Since 1950s, ozone layers has showed trend of concentration reduction found during observation and research. In 1974, Professor Lloyd and Dr. Molina from the University of California in USA published their paper, which is known as the chlorofluorocarbons in environment, and first put forward the causal relation between CFC's emission and ozone depletion. Then the scientific assessment of ozone depletion 2010 released by the United Nations indicates that Earth's atmospheric ozone layer has stopped depletion and will gradually recover. And in recent years, however, observational data showed that from the actual indicators like ozone hole area, depth and time elapsed, the atmospheric ozone depletion over Antarctic is still severe. For instance, since 2000, the ozone hole over Antarctic has maintained a high level of depletion in large area, and the ozone hole area has exceeded 25 million square kilometers in 2003, 2006, and 2008. Especially in 2008, the area has reached 27.2 million square kilometers, even larger than the entire North America. And in 2009, the size of ozone hole over the Antarctic was still at the level of the last few years. Therefore, it's quite clear that the ozone depletion over Antarctic does not stop, and there will be a long way to go for the recovery of atmospheric ozone layer. Next is the land desertification, or also known as the land degradation, meaning the degradation of land in arid and semi-arid areas mainly due to climate change and irrational human economic activities. Up to 1996, global area of land desertification has reached 36 million kilometers squared, influencing 1/6 of world's population from over 100 countries and regions. At present, there are still about 60,000 kilometers of land becoming desertification every year on the globe. Land desertification has caused severe hazards threatening human living environment, speeding up deterioration of ecological environment and limiting socio-economic development. The loss caused by desertification in agricultural productivity only would be roughly as high as USD 42 billion or 42 billion US dollars. With the increasingly severe global desertification as target, the United Nations has launched the Decade for Deserts and the Fight Against Desertification from 2010 to 2020 in the hope to further enhance global awareness of the hazard by desertification and land degradation, and meanwhile urging all countries to take effective steps to prevent land desertification. Environmental degradation, inequitable access to natural resources, and transboundary movement of hazardous materials increases the probability of conflict and thereby pose a risk to human and even national security. Transboundary pollution often negatively affects the relations between neighboring states sharing the common resource base, health risks, and involuntary migration due to, for example, water scarcity, inequitable access to land resources, uncontrollable stocks of obsolete pesticides, or other forms of hazardous waste, constitute threats to the stability and peace. Ongoing disputes and disagreements over the management of natural resources shared by two or more states can divides, and lead to hostilities. But common problems regarding the use of natural resources may also bring people together in a positive manner. Communities and nations can build confidence with each other through joint efforts to improve the state and management of natural resources. Environmental cooperation can thereby act as important tool for preventing conflicts and promoting peace between communities. Because all these problems, our government establishing some environmental policies which will help to reduce the effects of these problems, and all of us are required to follow. While specific observation action projects are important, like laws and environmental policy, sets the wider framework into which all conservation efforts fit. Reform of legislation and environmental policy, while often challenging to accomplish, can have positive consequences far more reaching than work that is focused on a single site or a single species. Even where strong policy commitments exist, advocacy and monitoring by civil society are often essential to ensure that they are properly implemented. Like, for example, the bird life policy, which means the national, regional, and global legislation, priorities, programs, and institutional arrangements that gives impact on birds and biodiversity. And often this can be categorized conveniently into differing sectors or focus areas. For example, climate change policies, agriculture policies, and forestry policies, in which may be linked with one or more mechanisms or approaches that operate at differing scales. For example, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is a vital changing corporate ensuring that birds and biodiversity policies are considered in decision making. Our advocacy work seeks to influence policy and its implementation so as to help achieve our strategic objectives for species, sites, habitats, ecological sustainability, and people. This involves advocating for actions and targets which this bird life believes which are essential based on particular high-level substances which is derived from the scientific information and data on conservation approaches and methodologies.
Good day. I, Decadent Mark Andrian C. Ando, will give a talk about the question, what is the relationship between the population growth and the environmental issues? Let me start my speech with a saying, which is, the more, the merrier. It is a very old line that expresses how happy life is when there are many people around us. It's like, in this life, we need the presence of many people just to make our life vibrant. Well, most of the time, it is true, but relating the line, the more the merrier, to the current status of the world's population, it is not the case. As the population continuously increasing, every life on Earth is suffering. Well, it sounds exaggerated, but it is true. It is because the overgrowth of the population directly relates to the consumption of more resources, which means that as the population continuously increasing, the Earth's natural resources depletes more rapidly. And by that, earlier I mentioned that as the population continuously increasing, every life on Earth is suffering. I am not only referring to human life, I am referring to the entirety of life in the ecosystem. As humans strips the Earth resources to accommodate the rising population numbers, the result of this is destructions in the environment. For example, deforestation, kaingin, and many others, which links to a devastating outcome, which is the loss of biodiversity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's not hard to cite the relationship of population growth to environmental issues. For we all know, even just the fact that everything that humans consumed and use are all from environment. And because of overpopulation, the consumption of natural resources is getting swift. Another thing, being labeled as the most manipulative species on Earth, as the population of human increased, it triggered the rise of different environmental issues. For instance, though it cannot be directly foreseen, population growth results in the increase of greenhouse gases, mostly from the carbon dioxide emissions. For visualization purposes, during the same 20th century, it saw the rapid population growth, same as the increase of the carbon dioxide emission. According to the studies, human activities are considered as the main contributors. Examples of human activities are the rise of the factories for production and operation purposes, the increase of oil consumption for factory operations, and, of course, transportation, carbon waste from agricultural farms, and deforestation for industrialization purposes and commercial use. Those human activities are just one of those, but there are many human activities that contributes. And it directly contributes to the increase of greenhouse gases, so do the patterns of climate, ultimately resulting in the long-term code, the climate change, and thus affecting every life in this earth and even the natural process of healing of the environment. Since I mentioned the natural process of the environment, to explain more about that, due to the overpopulation, the destruction of the environment is at its fast pace. And as we all know, the natural healing of the environment takes time. It's slow pace. And by that, the environment cannot fully heal because as time goes by, as the population arises, the natural healing of the environment cannot cope up with the destruction that human population or humans brought to the environment. While the interconnected problems of population growth and environmental issues seems overwhelming, it's important to remember that human can make changes that positively impact the planet. One good starting point is understanding and applying the concept of sustainability, which is the opposite of resource depletion. Sustainability describes a model of resource usage in which the current generation uses only the resources that Earth provide indefinitely, like the solar, wind power. Instead of burning fuels, it could really help in preserving the environment and minimizing the destruction. The minimization is not that small. It could give a very big impact to the environment. And it's one way for us to ensure that the future generation will inherit something in this world. So that's my take for the question, what is the relationship between population growth and the environmental issues? Thank you for listening.
Good day, I am Listones Mila. I will be answering the question, what is the relationship of population growth to food security? Achieving our goal of ending global hunger often means providing food for people in need. But we know more is needed to ensure people to enjoy food security. Food security means when all people at all time regularly meets the requirements to have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. While on the other hand, Population growth is the increase in the number of individuals in a population. So the big question is, why population growth matters to food security, or what is the relationship between the two? Population growth significantly increases the demand of food due to economic development, which means the average diet heavily relies on meat and animal products. Evidence had shown that countries with the highest number of people basing on food security has the highest population growth. They often struggle to pay their family with the little food that they can afford. More expensive, such as meat and grains, impact food security and also economic development in a certain area. Imagine, almost 1 in 7 people around the world are chronically hungry, lacking enough food to be healthy and lead active lives. This is despite the fact that enough food exists for all of the world's people. Agricultural policies, such as the prices of certain food commodities, such as meat and grains, and economic development, hugely impact food security, but demographic trends or the economic growth also plays a role. The rising and increasing of numbers of people often drives up for the demand of food, which typically results in additional use of arable land and water. This is called food and supply and demand. People who is mostly severely affected by food crisis are those who are living in poverty. Developing countries has also have rapidly increasing populations. Much as people in developing countries who face and also suffer in food security issues, where many experiences different types of malnutrition. People living in wealthier countries, where food insecurity can be a leading issue too, when too much unhealthy food has been consumed, in which this can lead to problems such as obesity. In my research, in about 1 million of people face food shortages, and this may double in the year 2030. So the United Nations Funds for Population Activities is an organization that tries to prevent the risk of overpopulation. It helps to educate other countries understand the current demographic and political issues. About 1 million people face food shortages. This dramatic rise means they can afford to have a proper meal to feed their families, where it has been told that by the year 2030, those who are facing food shortages may be doubled by the year 2030. The governments plan and manage social protection and food security using their current demographic trends. Changing population and distribution pattern is important for poverty reduction and food security. This is especially true in the absence of adequate food production, technology integrated programs that simultaneously address community needs for people and reproductive health. The Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO, projects that by 2015, the population will result in a doubling of demand of food globally. Addressing the health needs of family in the developing world, including through the increase of family planning, can help slow rapid population growth, improve health of families, and enhance their food security. And another study was being published by the Journal of Population Health Management states that over half of the patients frequently admitted to the hospital due to lack of regular access to enough healthy food. This affects people on low incomes and those who have mobility issues or difficulty in cooking, while on the other hand, in the wealthier country, food insecurity may be because of people eating unnecessary amount of unhealthy food. People may also suffer from micronutrient deficiencies if not eating nutritious food, and risk of becoming overweight or obese, which have dangerous health consequences. The Food and Agriculture Organization experts suggest that a better national food security program should be designed, and not enough focus is given to the quality of people's diet. Did you know that 16% of the population in developing countries remain undernourished? Nearly 1 billion of the people of the undernourished are hungry and living with inadequate daily calories and limited food access. An estimated 17 millions of infants are born with underweight each year, accounting for half of all newborn deaths. Poor families in urban areas spend 60% of their budget on food and are still hungry. Still, in this day, there are a lot of families face food security issues due to population growth in the family. Overall, demand for food security is really being affected by the population growth.
Population growth is known as one of the driving forces behind environmental problems because the growing population demands more and more non-renewable resources for its own application. So why exactly does the human population expand too rapidly? Growth is usually thought of as a linear process, an increase by a constant amount of over a period of a time. So the new amount is not influenced by the amount already present. For exponential growth, this is different because the increase of a factor is proportional to what is already there. When cells divide, there will be a constant doubling of cells already present. So when it comes to sustainability, it focuses on meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. The concept of sustainability is composed of three pillars: the economic, the environmental, and social, or also known as the informally profits, planet, and people. So, as human numbers further increase, the potential for irreversible changes of far-reaching magnitude also increases. Indicators of severe environmental stress include the growing loss of biodiversity, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing deforestation worldwide, stratospheric ozone depletion, acid rain, loss of topsoil, and shortage of water, food, and fuel wood in many parts of the world. While both developed and developing countries have contributed to global environmental problems, developed countries with 85% of the gross world product and 23% of its population accounts for the largest parts of mineral and fossil fuel consumption, resulting in significant environmental impacts. With current technologies, present levels of consumption by the developed world are likely to lead to serious negative consequences for all countries. This is especially apparent with the increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide and traces gas that have accompanied industrialization, which have the potential for changing global climate and raising sea level.
Good day, everyone. I am Cadet Mancao Lloyd, and I'm going to discuss the relationship of population growth to development. The key terms here are population growth and development, and this discussion is mainly anchored on Malthusian's theory of population. First, population growth is the increase in the number of individuals in a population from the past years up until now, while development basically means the growth of the country's economy. So what is the relationship of the population growth to development? So ever since, there has always been a balance between the good and bad things, so does the relationship of the population growth to development. Population growth helps the process of development in certain ways but also hampers it in certain other ways. This is because the relationship of population growth to economic development is complex. Alright, so let me tell you. On the positive side, an increasing population means an increase in the supply of labor, which is a basic factor of production. And growth of population and labor supply has all along been one major source of growth in recorded history. It is to be noted that human labor, with the help of necessary tools and equipment, was always and still is the greatest productive assets of a nation. A growing population means a growing market for most goods and services, and we know that division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. A potentially expanding market may stimulate entrepreneurs to invest more and more in capital, goods, and machinery. So business activity will be spurred as a consequence, so more income and employment will be created in the process. Therefore, a growing population leads to an increasing total output. However, it also makes for a greater number of individuals among whom this total output must be divided.
there might be more productive hands, but there are also more mouths to feed. This then leads to the rapid depletion of natural resources because it is much easier to harvest than to grow. And production alone is not limited, but the resources are. This is where Malthusian theory comes in. So the Malthusian theory of population states that the food supply limits the size of the population. That means that more food is available, the more people can be sustained. However, according to the theory, the population grows faster than its food supply. So Malthus assumed that families always have as many children as they can support. That means whenever the standard of living arises, people will produce more children and the size of family increases. He then pointed out that larger families can produce even more offspring in the following generation and so on, which causes the population to grow exponentially. For example, if every family had 4 kids, then the population in theory could double with every new generation. So meanwhile, the food supply is limited by the amount of land available at the end of time the crops need to grow. Thus, Malthus predicted that even with the help of technological advances, it would not be possible to increase food production beyond a linear growth rate in the long run. So there are many criticisms of Malthusian theory. It has been subject to a lot of criticism over the past century. Most of it is revolving around the accuracy of Malthus' predictions and assumptions. So number 1 is to the population growth. Although the global population has increased significantly over the past centuries, the growth rates in most modern economies have turned out to be much lower than predicted by Malthus. So as a result, the standard of living has continued to increase and the population has yet to outgrow its food production, such as in the first world countries like USA, Canada, Australia, and etc. Number 2 is the food production. Malthus stated that food production would not keep up with the population growth due to the law of diminishing returns in farming and agriculture. However, in the past century, the agricultural sector has been a significant increase in productivity due to technological progress. So advanced machinery, fertilizers, pesticides, and more resilient seeds have increased food production at a much higher rate than Malthus had predicted. And lastly is the standard of living. Malthus assumed that an increase in the standard of living would result in an increase in the birth rate and thus accelerate population growth. However, there is increasing evidence that the contrary may be true. In most modern economies, birth rates have declined as the standard of living has increased. So, in conclusion, Malthusian's theory could be both correct and wrong, depending on the country. Population growth could really be a key to country's development, but it ultimately depends on a country's status and capability. Just what Henry Kendall said, if we do not voluntarily bring population growth under control in the next 1 or 2 decades, the nature will do it for us in the most brutal way, whether we like it or not. So that would be all for my part. Thank you very much for listening.
Good day. So, my topic is all about the relationship of population growth to the future of globalization. The growing rate of globalization and population growth have caused severe environmental concerns in developing countries such as India and other countries in Africa. The natural resources in these countries have depleted remarkably as a result of the economic and social changes such as natural growth of population, migration from rural to urban areas, and increase in mechanization, which have altered the natural or environmental resource base of countries by pollution. This continuously rising environmental degradation is dangerous for human development, especially in these developing countries where the impact of environmental pollution is more rigorous, leading to ill health, increased disabilities, and mortality rate annually. World population would reach a level that would overwhelm the capacity of the earth and its resources to generate the food
and other goods needed for human life. Many felt that both population growth and economic growth needed to be scaled back or eliminated entirely to avoid an existential crisis. Many argued that fears about population growth were overblown by suggesting that population growth would stimulate technological innovations that would allow food production to keep up with a growing population, or that larger populations would result in more brains that could be applied in solving any resource problems that might arise. In low-income countries, rapid population growth is likely to be detrimental in short and in medium term because it leads to large numbers of dependent children. If population growth rates have begun to fall in recent years, the possibility that food and natural resources will be exhausted by a larger population seems to be less of a preoccupation than the more likely danger that continued use of the Earth's resources at current rates will lead to climate change and other environmental problems. Full benefits of globalization requires the free movement of goods, services, technology, and ideas, as well as the exchange of such productive inputs as labor and capital. Much progress has been made in freeing up the movement of goods, services, and capital, but the international movement of labor remains restricted. The free movement of workers within countries has long been one of the strengths of market economies. There may be limits to the ability of market forces and technology to overcome potential resource constraints or to protect such environmental goods as clean air and water, but it would be wrong to think that human ingenuity is completely impotent when it comes to creating the sustainable environmental future without severe population reductions. This is good, as dramatic reductions in the size of global population are highly unlikely short of widespread nuclear conflict or unusually deadly disease outbreaks. These analyses argue that future technological innovations will be unavailable to overcome resource scarcities created by the needs of growing population, without causing environmental damage. In the case of natural resources, it is expected that technological innovations will be directed towards creating substitutes as the resources become scarce and their prices rise. We define technological progress in an economic sense and emphasize that such progress has become an engine of economic growth for the modern economy. The important question to be posed is, does the size of population affect technological progress? The answer is that large population will generate many ideas that could bring about rapid technological progress. In addition, technological progress eases the constraints triggered by population growth by increasing the production of economic resources. Furthermore, we discussed the scale effect, which means that the larger population would generate a rapid growth of population by mediating technological progress. Next, in developed countries, declining fertility rates have been widely observed and identified as causing population declines in the future. This phenomenon has raised an important point to discuss concerning the relationship between technological progress and population. Lastly, we conclude that relationship between population size and technological progress encompasses complicated mutually exclusive effects. Specifically, technological progress leads to economic prosperity, which results in reduced fertility and population growth, while population size has a positive effect on technological progress. So that's all for my topic. Thank you.